Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Do you believe in life after addiction? You better believe it. Now, the host of Life After Addiction.
That's right. Welcome back. Season 2 is on its way. Man, we're fired up this afternoon. I guess this morning we have another in-studio guest, and I'm super excited. It's going to be from a unique perspective, and I know that this is going to be something that a lot of people are going to want to hear. Today we have Randall. Randall?
Hey, guys.
Man, and Randall is, he's an alumni of S2L Recovery, the program that Bruce and I are called to lead. And he has been out of the program for 3 months, and I've been talking with Randall quite a bit. He is a local guy here in the area that I am. And, man, I've just seen some awesome things happening in his life in a short amount of time. And so I thought it to be appropriate, Randall, to bring you in, and because we have a lot of alumni that listen, we have a lot of families of alumni and a lot of families of people who struggle with addiction, or maybe someone who's never been to our program, but they're struggling or have struggled. And so this is a very cool opportunity, man, to get a guy in here who's in the mix of it, man, who's feeling the things right now in this moment. And so that's what I wanted. I wanted the opportunity to have you come in, tell your story, and if you don't mind, man, I'm going to ask you some questions that we get all the time. You down?
Absolutely, man. Go for it.
All right. So why don't you lead us in? Tell us the story. Tell us a little bit of what led you to S2L, your history, where you're at now. You're wide open. Go ahead.
Man, so, wow, what led me to S2L? Well, what led me to S2L was definitely an addiction.
Yeah.
Obviously that. Man, that addiction that my family had no idea about. My wife didn't know. Nobody had any idea. I hid something away, and I tried to sweep it under the rug, and man, it just began to claw at my life, and began to just spill out in every aspect of my life. And I knew what I was doing was wrong, and just through the Lord, man, He kind of just broke me and came out.
Yeah.
Help.
So many people's stories is that double life, right? That my wife didn't know, my family didn't know, I kept it secret until you couldn't anymore. And a lot of times it's some action brought some things to light, and sometimes it's that conviction, and you're so done that it's just like, you know what, I'm going to end it, or I'm just going to confess it. And so, but let's go back. Tell us a little bit about your story leading up to the point of you going to your wife and just saying, here's the deal. But just tell us kind of leading up, your history, your story, your childhood. I mean, was it a good life? What was it?
Okay, where do I begin, man? So growing up, man, I never heard about Jesus. Just really growing up, my parents were, they were Buddhists. They came to the U.S. as refugees.
Oh, wow.
So, man, just being taught, just kind of, man, if you live your life good, man, and in merit, that, you'll be able to just have a good life. That's what kind of my parents kind of taught me.
That's the Buddhist. Okay. So merit and good life, and that's what the Buddhism moralistic code was that if you, and help me here, because I've studied religion too, but merit, do this, karma, right?
Yeah.
And the after the next life.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you do merit here in this life, you'll be reincarnated something of great value. And if you live a poor life, you'll be reincarnated as a fly. And, I'll just choose a fly because flies are super annoying, and I don't see any use for flies. But that's kind of what my parents kind of taught me, man. And,
wow.
They valued their tradition and their heritage. So, they brought that with them as refugees, and they began to instill that in my life, and show me practices of idol worship, offering food to the spirits to please the spirit. So I began to see things like that at a young age, and so what
did that do to you? I mean, as a young age, that, because one might argue, okay, teaching a child to have good morals, to do good things, to do that could be good. Where did that fall? Where did that go wrong?
Well, man, honestly, I think it began to give me an identity issue.
Wow.
Man, it began to instill, an ambition, and at a young age, man, you can't really help what you're taught by with your parents, because, I mean, at that point, who do you trust? Who do you trust at that point? And your parents, and they begin to take care of you, nurture you, and you don't have anyone else really to look at but your parents. So, man, they begin to just instill those, again, traditions in my life, and that's all kind of what I had to follow. That's all I had to follow at that age. Now, seeing that with them, going through that, man, I really didn't believe in what they were teaching me, because the way they lived their lives.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so the way, they began to live their lives counter to what they were teaching me, man, was absolute in destruction and chaos. I mean, man, their marriage was at a demise. Probably every day of my life, it just began when they're going to say quit.
Well, let me break this down. So this is just from a theological standpoint, and why I think that is. And this is just, studying religion, those kind of things. So you teach moralistic deity or deism. Not even deism, but morals, doing good, doing these things to earn the afterlife, the best afterlife, crumbles because of the human heart, right? Deep down, everyone knows that they can't be good enough. They have these wicked things going on, and what fleshed out in your life is you're being taught to do good. That's a great thing to teach. You're being taught to have these morals, and you're going to earn the better afterlife. And what you're seeing is the people that were teaching you this were human. And all of a sudden, not only human, but things in their heart were showing, and their marriage was at a despise. So what does that translate to a child? Man, they're not going to have a good afterlife. If everything's based on my merit and merit alone, and yet you're watching this, so of course you had an identity crisis. No wonder.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I saw all that in the wake of my parents' destruction, man, and I wanted to be absolutely nothing like them. That was my sole purpose of growing up. It's like, I'm going to pull myself out of this mess whenever I get the chance and be free from all of this. And I began to, learn a very, very probably terrible thing to learn at a young age. Begin to stuff my trauma, begin to stuff these wounds, and almost truck through most of my life. Truck through most of my life on, man, I'm just going to blow through life, not dealing with the deep issues inside of me.
Suppressing feelings, yeah. Wow.
So, yeah, man, one of my parents had to kind of go to a psych ward at some point, man, just in the destruction of their marriage, man. Things began to come at a real breaking point where kind of just the crippling point of everything, where, one parent left and the other parent had to pick up me and my brother. And then when one parent came back, the other parent just dipped out.
Wow. Pretty
much just abandoned us. Came home from school one day, never saw him again.
Wow.
Haven't seen him since. And then after that moment, as a child, what are you left with there, and you're just kind of like going through. And I feel like at that point, at that age, I was like, what else could happen? What else worse can happen? And then we ended up moving to Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Probably a year or two later after all that happened, and, had no idea why we moved to Tennessee. But later in life, I found out one of my parents came here as a refugee. Oh, okay. So it was kind of the beginning of his life. So,
okay.
But yeah, so after moving to Nashville, you come in as a child and you don't know anybody. You just kind of try to figure out, make friends, and then you just wear the wounds from your past, with your friends. You're making your new friends. You wear those wounds out there, and I guess after a while, I went to one school and to another school. Man, somebody kind of sat by me and just kind of talked to me, and he was like, "Hey, man, have you ever been to church?" I was like, "No." Well, I've never heard. What is church?
Wow.
What is church? And he began to kind of tell me the things that happen. He's like, "Man, you get to learn about Jesus and come hang out. It's really cool." So I was like, all right, cool. You know, I have nothing else going on for me. Like I had just moved and left everything behind me, and it's like, so why not? You know,
Sure.
let's hop in, let's go. And I kind of began to go to church. All of it to me was a cool hangout place. Back then I was like skateboarding, so it was like the really cool thing to do, and that's all I wanted to do. And just began to hang out there and sit through the messages, sit through the worship, sit through the small groups. Had no intention of doing it. I just wanted to hang out. I just wanted to get away from home and everything else. And after a while, man, my ears started to kind of open. I began to start listening, and I was like, man, like Jesus died for me? What? You know? And that began to spark something inside me, because when I heard that, you know, when I heard of growing up hearing Buddhists like, you got to do good, you got to do good, you got to merit this, but then somebody righteously lived to die for me, and while I was unrighteously living.
Wow, that's huge, and that's the theology. So that's the whole point of why moralistic deism or moralistic to eternity doesn't work, is because we can't ever be that. We can't ever be that moral enough, good enough to earn an eternity. And the whole thing with Christianity is, like you just said, Jesus came and lived that perfect life, that perfectly moral, perfectly righteous, perfect life, died for us. And now, if you have, and as you've learned, you know, and as Christians know, that if you believe and you make Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior, that his righteousness, his morals, his goodness is now imputed to you. And your punishment that you deserve is now placed on him. The great exchange. Pretty awesome stuff. Keep going. Sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Hey, absolutely. It's a beautiful exchange. But yeah, man, so, you know, hearing that message began to dispel things slowly. That's what I wanted. I was like, man, if he died for me, that's what I want. I want that salvation. Like,
wow.
Like, that's what I want. And so God began to slowly work that. And, you know, obviously I was like, yeah, Jesus, you know, I want salvation, you know, get baptized and you know, the whole 9 yards at that age. And, man, just began to do life within the church. But there were some ramifications that were kind of still going on inside of me. You know, you go to church and you learn, you know, the ins and outs, and you do life with the community. You go to trips, you go to that, and man, that's what I did. I did those things, but there's still something a little bit off inside of me.
Yeah.
I felt like, you know, and it was that trust. It was trust and doubt. At times in my life, because I was wrestling throughout all of this high school, just keeping that within inside of me and not letting God in that. I would box God out. I was like, I'll do everything else. I'll go to church on Wednesdays. I'll serve. I'll go to mission trips. I'll do all this stuff. And, you know, I'll proclaim the name of Jesus. But you can't have this part of my life. You can't have this part of my life. You know, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to deal with that. Like, that's, you know, whatever. And so I kind of trucked through, you know, life in that aspect in the church. And of course, man, God did some great things. God did some amazing things during that time, but there's still something in there that I didn't surrender. And kind of just spilling after that, or beyond that, in kind of my college years, and you know, just kind of trying to figure things out. And
and knowing Randall. So I know Randall. I've had the awesome opportunity to spend some time with him, talk to him. So when he's talking about, you know, I'm not ready to give that up. I mean, we all can relate to that. And just so you can imagine, you know, Randall's really given us the PG version of asked him to really, you know, hey, let's get through this. You don't have to get through it's deep, but you can imagine just listening to the words he's saying, the family he grew up in, the fighting. And then he said one of his parents had to go to a psychiatric hospital, and he's breezing past this stuff. But guys, you can imagine the lack of trust that he has, and the feeling of needing to suppress and for protection, for self-protection, self-preservation, and move on. So as he's saying these things, know that, man, we all have stuff, but you can know that what he's gone through growing up, the lack of trust, seeing and being told certain things, and now he's hearing this gospel, and it's hard to just give it fully up and lay it all down. And now you went from you're at college now in your story, but you went from skateboarder to star football athlete. You've kind of, I don't know how that works. Normally those are two different lifestyles, but you're a football athlete in high school, and now you're in college. Wait, didn't you start dating someone in high school that's important?
Oh, yeah. So my wife, absolutely. She'll kill me if she heard that and talk about her. So, yeah. So I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart. Man, we, ups and downs, you gotta figure out breakups and getting back together. But man, we ended up getting married, man, and she's an absolute blessing, man. And she's a extremely amazing woman of the Lord.
Awesome.
But yeah, on that, so, college, just trying to instill, kind of same identity crisis inside, just not giving stuff out. But man, we kind of just fast forward to kind of present now, what kind of just happened. So this year, basically, my story would be probably adoption to addiction. This year, we actually began the process of adoption. Not this year, but actually last year, kind of the end of the year, we began the process of adoption. And man, it was an amazing time because, man, God provided through our adoption so quickly. We had announced, and 2 weeks later, God began to kind of just move quickly. Adoption to addiction. So me and my wife always wanted to adopt. That was just what God has always put on our hearts, and definitely hers first, because she has a sister adopted from China.
Yeah.
And so I was always opened up to the idea, and I wanted to be opened up to that. And, so I felt, I was like, yeah, I definitely want to adopt. I was all about that. And so we, at first we began to obviously, try, but, we always wanted to adopt too. So through trying and stuff, we kind of like, we're just, all right, let's kind of reevaluate what's going on here. And it was like, let's try adopting.
Yeah.
And let's try, let's get in that process. And my wife, she's like a go-getter. So it's like if she wants something to happen, she puts all her time and energy and begins to, let's go. Let's start making calls. Let's start filling out paperwork. Let's get our home study. Let's do all this stuff. And so that's what we did. And we did that.
Yeah.
God began to really just swing open doors through that process. We had announced last year in November, and we ended up with a situation 2 weeks later after we had announced.
Wow.
And ended up adopting a boy locally here.
Yeah.
And man, life was grand. Life was great. I was like, wow, like that was so quick. And, and then what ended up happening is, man, the birth mom changed her mind. And that things weren't so great.
Yeah. How long did you have the boy home?
Man, for 11 days.
Yeah. So he was at your house 24 hours a day for 11 days. And then the birth mom in the state of Tennessee, the birth mom can change her mind in a certain amount of time. And she did. And so you said it wasn't good because she legally was able to take that boy back after being at y'all's house for 11 days. And the rooms painted, the pictures were being taken. And in fact, I heard the story from Scott Hord. Scott Hord was on the podcast. And I know Scott was big in helping in that process because Scott does a big abortion ministry and connected that mom with you guys. And so he said that y'all were taking pictures and he had to call you in that moment, right?
Yeah, so Scott Hord, man, the amazing man right there. Scott Hord, actually, he plays in the picture because we got our video shared on News Channel 5. We reached out to News Channel 5 and said, hey, will you, share this story about this competition we're in? We want to win money towards our adoption and, all this stuff. And that's how Scott Hord kind of found us. And he contacted my wife through Facebook. And he's like, hey, man, I got this situation. And that's where Lowry came from.
Yeah. And what he was saying, I believe I've heard him tell the story that when she made the decision, the birth mother made the decision that she did want to keep Lowry, y'all were actually taking family pictures at that time. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we were taking pictures of Santa Claus.
Yeah.
My wife I was at work.
Oh, okay.
She was with her family taking pictures of Santa Claus, and we got the call, and it was like, my wife's like, you need to come home.
Yeah. So that started you down a path of just destruction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So like losing him kind of just uprooted, or not, I won't say uprooted, the roots that I was dealing with, all the trauma in my life began to kill me inside.
Yeah. Everything that you had suppressed for so long, this was a boiling point. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a boiling point, man. I felt abandoned at that point. I felt like, why is it me? Why me? Why do I have to go through all these things? When things are going so good in my life now, and versus the things that happened to me at a young age, like, why me?
Yeah.
And those roots of abandonment, man, just unworthiness and acceptance.
Yeah.
All those things began to root out and began to,
surface. Yeah.
Surface.
And so you numbed them with drugs, and you. I mean, we don't even have to spend a ton of time on that, but I think the drug use and things like that began earlier on, but this really kicked it into high gear, and then in a shorter period of time, you were addicted. You couldn't put them down. You would have physical withdrawals, and you began to steal. You began to do these things, and then tell us the day, because you opened up with that point of. Or we talked about it. You know, there's two things that happens. You either get caught in an action, or the burden of conviction so heavy, it's just like you're done. Tell us about that day.
Yeah, man. So that day, the most scariest day of my life, just absolutely terrifying. And terrifying because, for me, I just didn't know what was going to happen. I either was going to die from using drugs, or I was gonna get help, and those are my two options. And that day was a fight of itself, because as we know, as addicts, or in an addiction, we know that we're gonna manipulate anyone and everyone, and even ourselves.
Yeah.
And talking ourselves out of doing what's right.
Yeah.
We're morally so jacked up through our addiction, and so that day, man. That day and really the night before, I began to, I was done. I was done. I was so done. I was done in every aspect of my life. I had given up on myself. I had given up on absolutely everything in my life, and I began to just kind of look back like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. Like, I can never be the man that God has called me to be. I can never lead my wife. I could never do anything in any good on my own anymore, because that's what I was doing, and I was doing everything in my own power to try to beat this thing. And so that's when I was done. So that day, I wrote a letter the night before. I had full intention of giving it to my wife that morning. Full intention. I'd stayed up probably 30 hours, just because, just the weight of what I was going to come out with, and just totally ready to come out. And next morning, I didn't want to come out. I was like, you know what? I can just sweep this on the rug, and I can hide this, and it was a warfare. I mean, it was a warfare in my mind. Like, it was a battle. I mean, if anyone was just imagine a battle, the most gruesome battle ever, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And just battling it out and putting it off. And that day, I was keep myself busy. I began to, I had to mow the lawn, and I was like, in my warfare mind, mowing the lawn, trying to put this thing off. And I get a text message from the student minister at the church. He's like, hey, man, I heard you were going to kind of drop out of leading groups. And I was like, yeah, man, dude, I'm not spiritually fit. And given that answer right there, I don't know what it was, and it was definitely the Lord, definitely the Holy Spirit, man. It just wrecked me. It wrecked me in that instance of just, man, you can't do this. You can't beat this without me.
Yeah.
And God just began to work in that moment, and I literally texted him back, and I was like, hey, man, can we meet up? And I knew from after I sent that text message, there was no turn back. And that day, or after mowing the lawn, about a few hours passed by, and I met up with him and kind of just spilled everything out, poured it out, and he was like, he was blown away, and he's like, man, how can I help you? And I was like, man, I got to get help, and I kind of told him probably what needs to happen, and he ended up calling you.
Yeah. Well, it was actually funny. I was pulling into the church. I had a meeting for a prison ministry meeting, and as I pulled into the parking lot, Ken Hampson called. It was the student ministry. He said, hey, man, I need to talk to someone. And I walked in, Randall, man, and what I saw was just a broken man. You were broken, man, and just ready. And you, man, from there, we went to your house. You confessed to your wife. Her parents came over, and that was hard because all the while, man, in this process, God was restoring you, and you didn't even know it. You had already, you had lost one child in adoption, but now you were almost finished with adopting a beautiful baby girl, your daughter, who now is your daughter. And I just remember the fear in your wife's eyes, your in-laws, and then you just broken, just weeping. And so, man, long story short, man, you came to the S2L, spent a few weeks, 6 weeks with us. And man, just watching you over that period of time, just watching you being, your yes was on the table. Whatever was asked of you, you did. Whatever, and you were hungry, man. And you were searching the Lord and just allowing God to restore you, man, and laying things down. That trust, like that full part of, you can have it all except for this. That's what that 6 weeks I think was important, because it was like, okay, even this, I trust you, God. Even this, all of me. And man, you've been rocking it out. You've been doing great things. I want to close this with this, because it's just an incredible story that we could talk about for a long time. But we've given the people a flyby, a 10,000-foot view of what Randall is. And then now your wife, restoration, your daughter, it's finalized. You're an amazing father. Your in-laws, restoration in that relationship. But I'd like to close with just this. What would your advice be? 3 months removed, so many questions we get from alumni. What would your advice be? Some of the struggles that you've experienced in 3 months, because it hasn't been just all rainbows and unicorns, right? I've walked with you through this process. I know the struggles. It hadn't been rainbows and unicorns, but what advice would you give? Because you have joy now, man. Like, even through some of this struggle that we've gone through in the last 3 months, not like addiction-related struggle, but like just family and trust and these kind of things that, that you weren't necessarily ready for. You have joy, man. You have a joy. And so what advice would you give for anyone out there who's either a family member or someone who's coming out of a rehabilitation center, anything like that? What advice would you give? Because it's so fresh for you, man, and this is just a realist answer that we could give. Like, I could give the answer, but man, I'm years removed, and so I'm not feeling the same things that you are. What would you say?
Yeah, so obviously, man, I've been 3 months out, so I'm pretty, fresh out. So like you said, I'm obviously dealing with, everything after S2L or after, rehab. And man, my advice to first is to whoever comes out. We have to realize that we are in an environment where we're unplugged from the world. All we have is a focus on ourselves.
Yeah, the bubble is what some people call it.
Yeah, and the bubble. And, we come out so full. We come out ready to fight everything that, or not necessarily fight, begin to try to restore everything that you had left in a wake of destruction. And that's what we have to remember is we come out full and we leave everyone else completely depleted. And we have to remember that that's going to rub completely opposite of each other. And we have to remember, and I'll say this to S2L alumni that come out, is that we have to remember that peace that surpasses all understanding. And when we live in that peace, joy comes out. And so in the wake of you trying to deal with your spouse and your family and your job, because they're gonna not trust you.
Right.
That is human nature, not to trust you and going through the things that you've done to your family. And we have to begin to fight that fight and remember God's word, and instill God's word, and to check our hearts too. And I would tell any alumni student as they get out, man, check your hearts daily, because what you've learned during that time you're there at S2L begins to really spell out when you get out.
Yeah.
Because our hearts have always been the issues of everything, and we have to dispel that with God's word and begin to align ourselves with that. And so that was my fight. So when I was going through the feelings of just everyone looking at you and everyone just, like, hey, man, like you did that.
Yeah.
And like, I know I did that, but I'm not that anymore.
Yeah.
And then I would say to the family members, and that, man, just to especially, man, if you're a believer in Christ, just to trust in God's goodness, and begin to walk with that, your loved one, and begin to be encouraging and not to focus on what had happened, but begin to speak life and see that and trust in God's goodness, that even though you went through a rehab, that God loved you enough and gave you grace and mercy to get through and to come out better, and we got to work on that.
Yeah, one thing I always say to families, and it's probably I know it's not probably, it is, it's probably a hard pillar to swallow, a family member hearing it from us on our end, but what I always try to say, with boundaries, be in a position that in your heart that you're willing to allow trust to be earned, right? We're not asking you to trust these guys right when they get out. How could you? That's an unrealistic expectation. But in a heart condition, be in a position to allow that to become, because some aren't. And that's the point. If you're going to allow trust to be earned, then that's the right place to be, I always tell people. And I'm going to close with this, Randall, because one thing I've noticed just observing you that I think is important, the reason I believe Randall is just has this peace and this joy and that he's rocked out is obviously is his foundation's Christ. But the reason that he's staying there is because Randall has been very intentional about what he's doing. He's been ferocious. He won't wait. Like he texts me, and it doesn't have to be me, but if you have someone that you're meeting with, right? We want you to go, and we always say a Paul, Barnabas, and Silas, right? You want a Paul, Barnabas, and Timothy. You want a Paul in your life, someone that's mentoring you. You want a Barnabas, someone that you're walking with that's an encourager. And you want a Timothy, someone that you're pouring into. And what I've seen in you, Randall, is that you're ferocious about that, man. You've allowed me to be a mentor. And you don't, we set up a meeting for the next week. And sometimes I'm intentional. Man, I'm going to let you pursue this. I'm going to let them reach out and ask if we're still meeting, and because it shows me that it's what you want. And man, you are on it. You're texting me, hey, we meeting tomorrow? Hey, we're going to meet. Let's meet here. And a week goes by. Maybe I forget. Maybe I'm not. It's not always scripted like I'm Yoda. Will they reach out? Maybe it's not always, maybe I forget because I'm busy. And man, you're intentional. Hey, I want to meet. You're hungry. You're going to your pastor at your church. You're meeting with them, the guys at church. You're serving at your church. You have people that you're speaking life into. And so, man, I just want to applaud you. And I would say for someone listening, you've got to be intentional, ferociously intentional, and act on those things. And man, I think you've done an awesome job in that. And I think it shows that, man, you're done with that old life. You're done. So, Randall, thank you so much for coming on, man. We're going to have you on again. I'm sure there's so much that we want to cover, but at 3 months, man, you've given a fresh conversation to people that need to hear it. And it's just so new on your mind. And man, I'm proud of you. Doing an awesome job. Thank you for coming and just speaking your heart and your truth and your story, man. I appreciate you.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure, man. Appreciate it for having me.
Yes, sir. That's Life After Addiction, baby. Next time.
Life After Addiction is a production of S2L Recovery. If you have any questions you'd like answered on the podcast, email them to info@springtolife.net. That's info@spring2life.net. And for more information on addiction recovery, visit s2lrecovery.org.